Minnesota Senator Al Franken's political future remains uncertain as he faces an ethics probe in the Senate and growing calls for his resignation in the wake of sexual misconduct allegations. President Trump weighed in on the scandal via Twitter today. He says the Al Frankenstein picture is really bad, speaks 1,000 words. Where does his hands go in pictures 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 while she sleeps? And to think that just last week he was lecturing anyone who would listen about sexual harassment and respect for women, Leslie Stahl tape. Today, the White House addressed criticism of that comment, some calling it hypocritical for the president to tweet about Franken and not about Roy Moore.
He has weighed on Roy Moore. He did it while he was on a foreign trip in Asia. I did it repeatedly yesterday. In fact, I took about 15 questions on that topic and only one on Al Franken. So to suggest that this White House and specifically that this president hasn't weighed in is just inaccurate and wrong.
So, Kimberly, I don't blame reporters for asking about what seemed like an inconsistency there. But the answer is what it is. She's basically saying, I think that they're sticking to their guns. They're not going to comment on it. And they don't police his Twitter. He does it himself. But I don't blame the reporters for asking. What do you think?
They've got to ask the question, of course, and I think the answer is kind of consistent with how they've handled things. I mean, she's got to do her job, and it's got to be under the direction of the president. He really kind of speaks his own mind. His tweets speak for themselves. He's telling you how he feels. And, yes, you could say, well, he's commenting on one, but not on the other. So, of course, the other side is going to say this appears to be, an inconsistency. But I will say this. The distinction, I think, with the Al Franken case, just from speaking like a prosecutor, is when you look at the facts and the evidence in front of you, there is an actual photographic picture that shows what transpired. She came out and gave the statement. He admitted it, apologized, essentially. So it's less of a due process issue as to exactly what happened and so many years ago, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's more persuasive, compelling evidence, perhaps, a little further along in the process.
Well, that was one of the things, that also came up in the briefing when the question about that Al Franken had apologized for allegations, and allegations against others are just still allegations, which is why the attack was worthwhile. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think there's much in the way of saying that there's an equivalence here because, to my mind, there's a photograph of Al Franken. I guess he's positioning himself as if he's touching this woman. But we have a tape from '05 of President Obama bragging about what he does with women. If he finds them attractive, just kiss them, grab them.
I don't think you meant to say President Obama.
I'm sorry. I meant to what?
You accidentally said President Obama.
Oh, no, I meant President Trump.
I was going to say, wow.
But you had all of us were paying a lot of attention.
My brain is flipping out.
We thought you were breaking news right now.
No. President Obama. President Trump. I can't stop. And then you have, the idea, 16 women who've said that President Trump was aggressive with them or violated them in some way. And we've never gone through all that. But clearly, President Trump thinks that stuff has been dealt with. It's in the past. The American people elected him president, and he is not subject to it. But I just thought it was incredibly unwise of him to open this door. It was Pandora's box that he just opened.
Throwing stones from a glass house.
Yeah.
Well, the Democrats have circled around and, for the most part, backing Al Franken. Take a look at this.
Unwanted sexual advances, groping or harassment are never okay. They're never acceptable, never funny. I think an ethics investigation is absolutely appropriate. He's worked with me and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. But this kind of conduct is totally unacceptable, abhorrent, and repugnant. And I think Al Franken's apology recognizes it.
Sexual harassment is inappropriate in every circumstance, in every way, whomever is involved. So let's start with that. And I do support that there should be an ethics investigation, and we'll see where that ends up.
This kind of behavior has been swept under the rug for too long. I will tell you, in general, there is absolutely no place for that kind of behavior in the United States Congress.
So, Pete, they're okay with they accept the apology. They want an investigation, and other than that, it seems like there might not be anything more that happens. Unlike other places, like just this week, NPR CEO had to step down after allegations that made people uncomfortable, and then he actually lost his job. So it's inconsistent all across the board, depending on whatever industry you're looking at.
Very much so. There is no consistent standard. You look at Republicans and Democrats, though, the double standard is rampant. I mean, maybe the president hasn't called for Roy Moore to step down, but how many Republican senators have?
True.
Dozens of them telling him to leave the race or
43.
be unseated. Of course. How many Democratic senators have called for Al Franken to resign? Zero at this point. And what are they calling for? An ethics committee investigation. Those senators called for it. Chuck Schumer has called for it. Durbin, Klobuchar, McCaskill. Even Franken himself is saying, investigate me in the ethics committee. A couple of facts about the Senate Ethics Committee.
He really doesn't like himself.
No. He does like himself, and he wants to preserve himself. Because here's what the Senate Ethics Committee does. Over the last...
I knew what you were saying.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Yeah.
I'm a little slow on the uptake. I know, I'm sorry about that. I'm warming up here. In the last decade, the Senate Ethics Committee has investigated 613 allegations in this committee. 613 allegations over the last decade. 75 investigations, all anonymous, no consequences.
Wow.
Not a single senator has yet to be found any sanctions against. So, yeah, investigate me. Because I'll be found innocent no matter what. It's a sham. It's the swamp at work to protect themselves.
I realize that this isn't a math-heavy show.
Try us. But, I mean, you're from Fox Business and also just
But it appears as though instead of a zero-tolerance policy, there is a 100% tolerance policy.
Yes.
If there is no punishment or no responsibility meted out to any one of these people.
100% posturing policy.
Now, what's really interesting here is this entire thing, if they end up backing Al Franken, which I imagine they're going to. I imagine, this is all a big dog and pony show. They've been given their talking points. They have to say, blah, 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 ethics investigation, blah, 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 including Al Franken has to say the same thing. Because otherwise, if they don't do anything, it completely neuters their argument against the president. And that's one of the favorite Democratic talking points about the president is his past, political correctness. Where does it end? I also think that the president, I agree with you, he should be tweeting about Roy Moore, and he's got a political leg to stand on because he can say, and he loves being right, I was the one who backed Luther Strange. That was a much better choice. If y'all had listened to me, you wouldn't be in this pickle. So
and when he tweets,
no
he
more
should definitely do the Y''ALL, like you just said it.
Absolutely
the y'all,
right.
I think it would go down really well.
But
I think he should also take
So that way, every
ask.
reporter that has to read the tweet will have to say y'all.
That's true.
Awesome.
Find a lot of
Maybe
joy
they
in
could
that.
also say, bless your heart, to all the Republicans out there who want to make a false equivalency between the charges against Moore dealing with a 14-year-old girl and the charge or allegation here against Senator Franken.
No,
Allegations
it's not just
on
an
both
allegation.
sides.
He confirmed that it happened.
Well, yeah, no. I'm saying, well, the idea
He
is that this
apologized.
picture that he's actually groping the woman. I don't know if he's pretending
it's a
or
mime
looking or whatever.
grope, at least
but
in the
there's a
picture.
big difference between what Al Franken is being charged with and what we know about
I think
the
you're
charges
absolutely
against
right. I think that's right, and I think there's an important distinction to be made there.
And I also think that that's why what Pete's saying is true, Kimberly, which is that 43 U.S. senators have said no more. And also, President Trump is head of the Republican Party. The Republican National Committee has withdrawn funds from the races. So in a way, I think that it was something they could have said at the briefing today, which is that the party has spoken.
The party has spoken.
That's what they could have said.
Yeah, so it's been handled, and the party has spoken very loudly and also with their financial power, and they've pulled that back. So I think there has been a very swift and judicious response from the Republicans, and I think it is clear that there's hypocrisy on the part of the left and the Democrats. I mean, again, Juan, this guy, he didn't say I didn't do it, or it isn't me, or it's my doppelganger in the photo. He's like, I'm sorry, I did it, okay, and that's that.
But maybe
But
like with
I
Roy
think there's
Moore.
a big difference. Let me say, I think there's a big difference between Roy Moore and Senator Franken. But
You mean the
why do
nature
you
of
get
the
to make that choice?
allegations?
both the nature of the allegations, but here's what's going on, Kimberly.
is?
It's
if they're
become
more
like a
with Al
team
Franken, though?
sport. It's like,
And the
there's a
Democrats are the worst
Republican.
team.
If you're a Republican, we'll find a way to say, don't say anything about it. But it's a Democrat. Let all hell break loose. This is ridiculous.
It's the
This is
exact
so hypocritical.
Democrats say they're the party of women, and the Republicans are committing a war on women. Yet when someone comes out with actual evidence, they say Senate ethics
What are you
investigation
talking
is gonna
about?
go nowhere.
Do you know
the
Donald
photograph.
Trump?
What about in the
evidence
tweet?
about Donald Trump?
First of all, it's an
And-
audio
and
about
let me just-
saying something as opposed to doing something, which Al
and
Franken
these
has
women,
admitted to
these
doing.
women,
In addition to jokes about
the
rape
women,
on Saturday Night
11
Live.
women,
Okay,
11.
let me
and let
ask
me
you-
just say to Kimberly, the GOP of Alabama is still backing Roy Moore. Steve Bannon is still backing Roy Moore.
Okay, well,
Sean Hannity
Steve-
is still backing Roy
Steve Bannon
Moore.
is an individual citizen. He can do whatever he wants.
Well, I'm
He's his
just
own
saying,
man to make his own decisions
where all of
about
a sudden then is your outrage at the Republicans for
But I
continuing
think-
to support Roy Moore?
No, I'm
But
not
Juan,
gonna
I
have
do think
individual
that
and
there is a
specific
distinction
outrage.
there. The state GOP, yes, you're right. And look, they'll have to deal with the consequences of that if they lose the race. And also just morally. But the RNC, of which
The
the
national
president oversees, did withdraw funds
a bigger deal.
from Roy Moore.
Right.
And I think that that is a statement. But my only point was that today, one of the things that they could have said at the White House is that we have spoken. Money speaks loudly. We are not supporting this race.
That would have been better. But, you know, it's even interesting to me, Ivanka, the first daughter, comes out and says there's a special place in hell for people who abuse children.
Yeah.
Breitbart comes out and says, oh, Ivanka should shut up. She has no place, no standing to say. I think, what is going
that's
on?
a difference. I think everyone has the right to say something. If you were offended, if you were outraged, if you were moved by something, and she's a mom, and she may have a different perspective than other people, she absolutely has a right to say that. She's not saying, you people of Alabama absolutely have to force him out of the race, and we have to do everything in our power. She's not affecting the race. She's expressing an opinion, and I think that is
that's exactly right. And why does Juan Williams get to decide, or any politician in Washington, D.C.? Let the voters in Alabama decide. Let the voters in Minnesota decide whether they want that person representing them. That's, I think, what so many people reject. It's these elites who are hypocrites themselves, telling them what they need to do.
Well, I think that one of the reasons the RNC pulled out, though, is because everyone will be tarred with it and stained with, and every single ad going into 2018 and into 2020 will be tied to him. And I think that was the attempt initially, was say they believe the women were credible from the Washington Post piece. There have been more to come. There might be still more to come on the Al Franken story. And the congressional story is not over.
Sure. Right.
So, and there are gradations of all of this. There are victims to be considered. Like, we don't talk a lot about them.
But there are cultural and political ramifications for both parties.
Sure.
Neither side wants to be the one who doesn't deal appropriately with sexual harassment claims. I think it's a bigger gamble for the Democrats, who've really taken the high road in some of these cases that hit awfully close to home.
No, but you're saying it's because the Democrats have stood up for women's rights, especially pro-choice and the other.
Well,
and that's what you're saying. That opens them to charge.
Guess what?
Unless they're taking money from Harvey Weinstein.
Right, but they're not. And I mean, gosh, it seems to me the Democrats, no, they returned a lot of that money. Even now, they're returning money from Al Franken and Al Franken's committee. Yeah, but what I was saying is the reason that the Breitbart guy was telling Ivanka Trump, the first daughter, to shut up was because it opened the door, just as President Trump did last night with his tweet, to people like me saying, hey, wait a second, are you guys forgetting the charges against Donald Trump?
The door's already been wide open on that. That's been litigated for a year.
That's
2 years.
We get to talk about this again in the B blog, so there's more, because some